I don't remember what was said when I caught you two in bed. But now I sit here drinking shit beer, chasing Johnny Walker Red.
Hi, welcome to Clown Interrupted with KiKi Maroon. That's me. So, I went to San Francisco to meet up with my mentor and sober buddy, Kurtis Matthews, who's my guest in the next episode. While I was up there, I asked Kurtis if he had any suggestions for other sober comics I should reach out to while I was in the Bay Area. He connected me with his friend and today's guest, Michael Meehan. Michael's a stand-up comic, sketch artist, and filmmaker based in San Francisco. He's been on The Late Late Show, The Dennis Miller Show, Last Comic Standing, and many, many other shows and movies. He talked to me about coming up in the San Francisco comedy scene in the 80s, and honestly, I am so impressed that he was able to get sober during that time. Back then, cocaine was not only the glamour drug of choice, but also how a lot of comics got paid. We discussed that, his relationship with Robin Williams, breaking down the ego, and Bobcat Goldthwait being one of the early sober comics. After the interview, I'll explain why that's super important to me. I loved his story, and I hope you do too. Here's me and Michael Meehan.
And when tomorrow comes around, I may be 6 feet underground, but I'll still have one more for now.
How long have you been in comedy?
I started in 1984, so
35
years, I guess. Yeah. So that was, but once I started doing that, it was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And so I got some early successes because I was, more outrageous, I think, than other open micers or whatever.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by more outrageous? Well,
much more physical, and I'd jump off stage and do things. There was a club, the Hole in the Wall, the Holy City Zoo, which was Robin Williams' home club, but they had this tiny stage, but they had this pillar on the stage, and it had a rope wrapped around it, and I climbed the pole and was doing a set, 10 feet above the audience.
Did you acknowledge that you were 10 feet above the audience, or did you try to just do your regular set?
I would do I will now jump off this this height into a bead of sweat on that man's forehead, stupid stuff like that. But I got some successes early on, but to me, the main thing was to get good. And so did all the TV shows, got like the Comedy Tonight, Whoopi Goldberg was hosting that. I got 2 episodes of that, which was very cool.
Oh, wow.
So I got a little buzz. I was kind of like, hey, I'm going to make it in show business. But of course, drugs, not drugs, marijuana. Well, marijuana's a drug, and alcohol, slowed me down along the way. But, when I started comedy, it was just like, oh, this is great. Mm-hmm. You get to perform and you get these free drink tickets. So it was like, all right, this is heaven.
Yeah, you get paid in drinks. That makes it real easy.
Yeah. Oh, and then at that time in the 80s, cocaine was rampant. And I never got into cocaine because it was like, I knew that it was the deep end of the pool I didn't want to go into. But people would get paid in coke or do lots of coke, and it was just kind of it was a scene that I knew I couldn't hang with, so I didn't do that. But
that's honestly surprising that you didn't get into it during that time, because I always think of like Sam Kinison and that kind of thing, where that was part of the comedy, was you were going to do that, and it's hard if you see that those successes around you doing that to not be like, well, that's what you do.
Yeah, that's the funny thing is you see people who abuse drugs and drinks, and you're like, oh, well, that's what you do. That's how you become successful in show business. And it was interesting because here in San Francisco, Kinison got some good, got a big foothold here, and I would go see him. And it was like, oh my God, this guy's on fire. And same with Bob Goldthwait. Bob Goldthwait got a big start in San Francisco, and so it'd be fun to see. Although at the time he's sober, but that was one of the early sober comics was Goldthwait.
Really?
Yeah,
I did not know that.
And he would just drink Tab, which was like the most horrific,
It was like not Sprite, right? Or was it Coke?
No, it was some sort of brown cola that tasted so horrendous, but he would just chug that stuff. And, he did, his act at the time was full on screaming and yelling, but it was so fun to see, like, oh, here's this one guy taking this whole room hostage with comedy. And I was like, well, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the early,
and he was sober then.
Yeah. He would talk about people offering me a drink is like, oh yeah, you're the, hey, you want to do some coke? Oh yeah, you're the guy I want wired in your house. What do you mean you don't have any more pets? He would do stuff like that, and then he'd do like the swinging motion around his head, like he's swinging a cat around. And
I'm so jealous that you had that, because I think that was part of my thing, is that I wanted. Yeah, I'm very attracted to that magnetic, loud, kind of crazy personality that is so much of comedy. But I didn't see that sober, so I didn't think that was a possibility. So I'm jealous that you saw somebody do that in that state.
Well, in hindsight, looking back on it, it was great but San Francisco at that time was ground zero for comedy. Even though there's a lot of scenes like Boston was happening and some other scenes, but San Francisco really was a phenomenal pond where people were just doing so much crazy, interesting, wacko stuff. And it was,
Yeah, Kurtis was telling me about like you and your brothers were a thing. He kept saying that y'all were like the Three Stooges.
Oh, yeah. Well, we had a group. That's after I got sober, we got together and started doing the Meehan Brothers. So my brother Howard and I would always goof on stuff. And then my youngest brother, Chris, had gone to New York to the Meisner School of Acting. So he came back from New York and he was kind of looking for something. And by then, my brother Howard and I had started doing a little bit of a duet. We would just do some goofs. Mm-hmm. But it was funny because when I got sober, I was like, okay, I'm just going to get sober. I'll give up my comedy career if I have to.
Everything's going to end and I'll do that.
Yeah. So I was like, if I just can stay sober, I'll be okay. And what happened was then I gradually, and nothing was funny, of course. I tried going up and doing stand-up sober, and I was just new in sobriety, so I hadn't really grasped hold of what life was about without, booze.
Yeah.
After a while, though, it took off. I started to, just become so much more cognizant of performing sober. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is great. And
we said you opened for Robin Williams as well, right? So like, so I just want to understand the timeline of like, so the pattern I'm seeing is usually no success, sobriety, success. So if you had success before, what happened? What was the rock bottom? What led to you deciding to quit drinking if you were already having those successes?
Well, my personal life was going to shambles. I was married at the time and had a daughter who was 5, and my wife was like, I can't take it anymore. She gave me the boot, and rightly so. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because during that time, my brother Howard came to me and said, hey, let's do this play called True West by Sam Shepard about 2 brothers. And one brother is the responsible brother, and the other brother plays the alcoholic crazy brother. And I got to play the crazy alcoholic brother. But it was funny because I had to quit smoking weed and drinking to do the role, to learn the...
to be focused enough to play the alcoholic.
Yeah. So it was like, but as soon as we closed, the closing night, I would drink on stage those near beers or fake beers or whatever. But as soon as closing night, it was like right back up, smoking joints, drinking. And then so I kind of went on a tear for maybe 2 months, and then my family, all 7 brothers and sisters, and Michael Pritchard, who was a big sober comedian who I knew, that was the biggest sober comedian I knew. They did an intervention on me.
You had an intervention? You're the first person I spoke to who's actually had an intervention.
Well, it was the best thing that happened to me. In fact, Debbie Durst, who is a comedian and married to Will Durst, just told me the other day. She was the one who told. There's my landline. No, it's probably a robocall telling me that my IRS account is in danger.
Mine is in danger every day.
Every day. Mm-hmm. You've got to be...
my student loans have a lot of problems, too.
Wait a minute.
I actually miss a lot of very important doctor's calls because I don't answer them ever because they're all robo. And then I'm like, oh, shit, I was supposed to make an appointment. That was a real phone call.
Yeah, it's like then you got to go back through the system and find out whoever phoned you. Yeah, no, it's a pain. And modern angst... But yeah, Debbie Durst was the one who sort of told Pritchard, like, hey, Meehan's got a problem. He's out of control here. And part of it was also just I was acting out of control as well, which was kind of fun to do because it was like, all right, I'm getting divorced. I don't really have a place to live. I was sleeping in a van, or crashing at a waitress's house. And then, it was... Anyway, so... I went to rehab, and it was great because it was like finally I got a vacation from myself.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was going through one of those phases, I guess, justified it because I knew I was in the middle of it. Like I said, I'm acting out, but because I knew I was doing it, I thought I was in control of it. I'd say like, well, I'm letting the id take over right now. I deserve this. Life is falling apart around me, so I get to be crazy right now. And I thought it was so mature that I was making the choice to be crazy rather than being a victim to it. And that made it okay. It was not okay.
Yeah. That's the biggest thing is we delude ourselves that we're okay.
So was rehab it? Did you have a couple of setbacks along the way, or once you went to rehab, were you?
I prayed to have the hold of booze lifted. I really prayed hard. I didn't have a problem with God. A lot of people do, but I was always praying for God to get me out of jams anyway. So, so I was like, hey, this is just one more thing. You got to help me. They say if your God doesn't work, get a new God or get a better God or get a bigger God or whatever. But I just had to make a slight adjustment. But it was like, all right, I'm really praying for you to lift this obsession to drink from me. And it was lifted during the 28-day program. And, I don't know, I can't say exactly when, but it was gone. And suddenly I didn't feel like drinking. They suggested I go live in a sober living place and get a sponsor and do the steps. And so I kind of started to do those suggestions. And then like everybody else, once you start, you realize, okay, there might be something here. So.
Yeah. Did you take a break from comedy then because it tends to be in bars?
I kind of did just a little bit, but I started back in. And of course, I wasn't funny. I felt just raw. I was like, oh my God, I can't do any of my old stuff. So it took a while, but I kept going up and I kind of sucked for a while, which was fine. But the idea of doing stand-up didn't disappear, but it got, I guess I got perspective and I put it, in like, okay, I'll stay sober. That's the most important thing. And then if I can still do comedy, I'll give this a shot again. And it worked out, but sobriety was number one. So, but the obsession to like make it in show business or comedy at all cost was kind of chucked aside, which was such a relief in a way. It was like, okay, I'm just going to go up and try to be funny.
Yeah, you had different priorities. I have to tell you, I'm so grateful to hear this, by the way, because pretty much everybody I've spoken to was like, no, it was fine. I would go on stage sober before, even when I was an alcoholic. And I was like, what are you talking about? Because that was what was most difficult to me is I always went on stage drunk. Always, always. And so going on stage, that was terrifying to me and changed everything. And everyone I've spoken to was like, no, that part was easy. So I'm glad that you had that as well.
Oh, yeah. No, when you were just asking about that, I was just looking back and it was like, it was so painful. I'm sure the audience was just like, oh, my God. But slowly it came back around, but I think like 7 months into sobriety, I did the comedy competition at San Francisco, which at the time was a decent big deal. But anyway, you go around and you perform every night, and I just like, all right, I'm going for it. And I had done it several times before, drinking, and failed miserably and couldn't figure out why. But this time I went in with just a pure heart, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to pray for the other competitors. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to turn over the results, all the stuff that the program tells you what to do. Show
7
up.
months, and that's amazing to already be in that space.
Well, the first couple of months, of course, were just horrible. But then after a while, I was like, all right, I'm gonna try this. But one thing they said, in sobriety was like, go ahead and try new things, do things differently, see how it is. They're talking about, hey, you go to a meeting, people invite you to coffee, go to coffee with them. That's all it is. They're just going to coffee. So learning how to socialize without alcohol was a deal. And then you start noticing that, oh yeah, a lot of people aren't drinking excessively.
Yeah.
Maybe one or two, but
that's a huge thing is I thought like, I'm not going to have any friends. And I was like, oh wait, most people are not alcoholics.
Yeah, most
I
people
just had found them.
Yeah. And you do. I mean, don't you? It's just like immediately you just find those who just like will just take it up a notch, and you're like, all right, well, these are my people, I guess.
Did you have to change your comedy? Was it about drinking, or was it just that you were drinking while you were talking about what you were talking about? Like, did the jokes stick with you?
Some of the jokes were about that, but most of it was my comedy was kind of absurd anyway, so
okay.
It didn't rely on my persona as a drinker.
Okay, so it was just an internal thing that you had to get over.
Yeah.
Okay. That's okay. I had far too many jokes about drinking, and so now I'm like, got to talk about regular things.
Yeah, well, that was it. It was kind of, you threw out a bunch of that, and that's why it's difficult, I think, in the beginning. Plus, also, you were talking about drinking before you're going on stage, and I certainly would drink, have a beer or two, before going on, and then after, of course, the party's on, hanging out.
My first bombing after stopping drinking, I remember that very clearly. It was at a festival, and it hurt so bad, and I used to just when that would happen, I'd run immediately and grab a shot, and I just had to sit by the side of the stage, and I just looked so uncomfortable. And one of my friends was like, "Do you want to drink?" And I was like, "No, I have to feel my feelings right now."
Isn't that the craziest though? It is to be forced to feel your feelings, and then after a while though, you're like, "Oh, okay, this is not bad."
It's fuel now, where I'm like, I don't want to feel this thing again. What do I need to do to be better?
Right. And it's like, okay, I bombed. I'm going to go home. I'm going to go to sleep, and tomorrow's going to be a new day. So that's where you sort of put it in perspective, where it's not like you got to get obliterated about this failure or whatever. Or perceived failure.
Yeah. Feels like the most important thing in the world that night. Mm-hmm. So because you are sober and you have so much time, do you have a lot of comics or people coming asking for your help or your advice doing that?
Periodically. It's funny because one of the comics I used to hang out with and smoke tons of weed with lived right next door to the sober living place that I lived at for 18 months. And I saw him twice in that 18 months. Whereas before, I'd see him all the time. Mm-hmm. We'd be out smoking weed and drinking all the time. And it was so funny because he lived right next door and I saw him exactly twice. But people knew that I didn't drink, and I sponsored a couple guys that were comedians, but I sponsored guys in AA, whether they were comics or not. They tell you if you go through this. My first sponsor was a cop, so he'd come up to the sober living place in his cop car, give me a big hug with his Kevlar vest, and we'd go through the big book and do the steps. And he was such a kind man, and it was like, oh, okay, that's how you do it. So I would try to pass on his lesson of like, hey, just go through the stuff. And, in the beginning, of course, you're like, oh, these 4 steps. People, of course, are skittish about going through all their crap. And it's so funny because after you stay sober for a while and you hear a couple 5th steps, they're all the same. It doesn't matter. It's like, yeah, we did that. Yeah. It's just like, all right, let's get moving. What's your part in it? What's your part? Oh, you're selfish, self-centered, full of fear. All right, good. All right, move on. Next person. Yeah, it is so funny. But before you do it, you're so full of fear. Mm-hmm. And then after you do it, it's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I actually, Andy Huggins is the first person who said, when I didn't know what to do, he's like, go to a meeting. Multiple times I drove to a place, I looked up online, they're having a meeting, sat in the car, and then left. And felt like, well, at least I tried. Because it was so scary to think, I'm like, I'm just going to walk into this room. Do I have to sign up? I was so terrified. And it took a long time. And then once I finally started going to the meetings, even then I would go and then not go for like 6 months and then go to another one and not go. And so Kurtis is actually the person who was like, you need to go. It's not like a parachute only when things are going on in your life. It's active. Continue to go. And I was doing it the hardest way possible.
Yeah, I was going to say that's rough, but that's good advice though. It's not just a parachute. But I find being sober and going to meetings, you hear these stories and you're like, oh my goodness, creatively, it's so interesting to hear how people dealt with stuff, or you hear new stories or something, or someone will say something that's just so hilariously tragic or something. You're just like, oh my God, and just scribble it down.
So I actually accidentally went to a Crystal Meth Anonymous meeting and it was the most fun I've had in a long time because everybody was so removed. They were 5-10 years in. And so they just had the funniest stories and they could joke about it and laugh. And we were having the best time. And I was like, I love meth addicts.
There's nothing like a little time past the debauchery.
Because it it was just really refreshing and sweet to be like, oh, we all have the same problems, the same issues. We dealt with it in the same crazy ways. And no matter how different and insane your story is, I get it. I understand.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, I think crystal meth's so crazy that their recovery is such a blessing because it's so destructive. But of course, drinking, is equally destructive as well. But it is funny to see the various things. But a friend of mine told me, he was like, well, the only difference between a gay fifth step and a straight fifth step is there's probably a little more sex in a gay fifth step, But of course, it's guys having sex with guys. So of course, there's going to be more sex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was actually a performer in Austin who was from here, actually. Everything's coming together. His name was Bobby Barnaby. He's a circus and burlesque performer. He just moved to Austin a year ago. And he's the person who actually walked me through this book that he had, because I was like, I don't understand the steps. I know that they exist, but I'm a very an analytical. I'm like, is there a book I know they have the big book. Right. I wanted worksheets or something. Yeah. I was like, what do you mean work the steps? They're just reading. I need things to do. So he showed me a separate workbook that he got that was actually walking you through, and you fill everything out and answer these questions. And it was kind of like a companion to having a sponsor.
Oh, okay.
That's the way my brain works. And I was like, thank you. I need this thing, because I feel like there's less performers and artists in Houston, I feel like.
Is there more in Austin, you feel?
There's a lot more in Austin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I like to talk to people who understand those aspects of being in the public eye and that kind of stuff, because there's, I don't know, I just think there's a different kind of crazy about some of the things. And so I like to connect with people on that stuff.
So it's changed. Certainly my comedy has changed, like I did, with my brothers, and we wrote we're like a three-headed stand-up. So we had a lot of goofy stuff, and our show was very clean. So but it was super high energy. So we'd come in, and my brother Chris was very physical, and my brother Howard and I would be very wordy. So but we did a takeoff on Who's On First, but it was called Who's On Crack. Who's on crack? What's on crank? I don't know. Who's on smack? And so it was pretty good parody of that, and we would do it. But even so, it was still very wordy. But we would throw that out every once in a while. But we had this other, and in fact, this was one of our first bits that we did. It was called Walk for Justice, where we go, folks, thanks for coming down. And it was our closer bit. We'd go, thanks for coming down to the show. If you have a little time tomorrow, we're going to be at this great benefit. It's called Walk for Justice. It's for a walk, and it's for justice. And who knows, we could have more justice. And then my brother Chris would start walking behind us. And then we'd go, now, if you have a little time that afternoon, there's a run for peace. So, and then Chris would start jogging. And then we'd just start in, hopscotching for hopscotching for halitosis, and horseback riding for hemorrhoids, and Chris would be going behind us and Howard and I would just be on this total thing like, oh my God, you do so much for people, and we'd just be over obsequious, I guess is the word, but just falling over each other of how much we were doing to help other people. And meanwhile, Chris is getting, worn out in the back. Skydiving for psoriasis. Come on out to the airfield. And so he'd lay on the stool and pretend like he was dropping out of an airplane. And then in the end, it was kicking yourself in the testicles for tetanus.
Oh my God.
And then, but it was a fun, that was our big closer. So that was a lot of wordy stuff. But
do you still do skit type stuff now, or was that specifically with your brothers?
Well, those specifically with my brothers, but we'll do some sketches. I've been working with Johnny Steele a little bit. Where I was talking about sketches, but it was fun to do sketches with my brothers, and I haven't really found a sketch group to be part of. But every once in a while, we would collect, especially in the earlier days, we'd collect comics together and do shows. And the Other Cafe in San Francisco really encouraged it, and they would put 4 performers together, usually 3 comedians or 4 comedians, and give us a week, and it was Comedy Theater Week. And so we just...
That's amazing.
It was a great show because it was like a 90-minute show, everybody did 10 minutes of stand-up, so that was 40 minutes of the show that was already written, and then we'd come up with 50 minutes of sketches.
That's actually something Bobby Barnaby was talking about that he misses in Austin and is trying to build there is more like incubation spaces. He was talking about how up here he felt like there was so many spaces where you could really just try anything and work on different things like that. And then Austin, it's more of like they're booking a completed something already versus like you can come here and work on this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, San Francisco was great, but I don't know if they have the space anymore. I mean, the .com, the tech boom has just steamrolled every space that you could hang out and do stuff with. So,
yeah, Kurtis was telling me that there's only 2 comedy clubs here, which I was really shocked about.
What's crazy is the 2 main clubs, the Punchline and Cobb's, are owned by Live Nation, which is owned by Clear Channel, which is a enormous national media company, but they were considered the underdogs because when Google came in and wanted to buy the Punchline building, it was threatening to close the Punchline, which is a premier room. I mean, the Punchline's so fun to play at. Low ceilings, great A room, but and they got a reprieve through the city, and Google then backed off and was going, well, we were really serious about that, Meanwhile, they're crushing somebody else and destroying some other.
So Live Nation was the underdog?
So Live Nation, which, steamrolled all these clubs and bought up all this stuff, they were the underdog. It just goes to show you the monopoly. But part of the offshoot of that, though, is that there's tons of open mics everywhere that are run by comedians or somebody. And Kurtis Matthews runs the San Francisco Comedy College. I mean, that's a great alternate venue to produce comedy. And then there's a few other places. There's some improving stuff and over.
Are there any clubs in Oakland?
Oh yeah, there's tons of clubs over there. In fact, they've been going pretty strong in Oakland because there seems to be a little more space. I don't know about sketch groups. I'm sure there are sketch groups, but I just only know from periodically going over to stand-up over there.
Yeah, I was just surprised when he said that because I know there is so much. I always hear about comedians coming from here. It seems like there's a very strong scene in history here. So when he said there was only 2, I was really shocked about that.
Yeah, there used to be a lot more, but it's definitely shaken out. So there's just sort of one-nighters here and there, mostly open mics. There's not any money in it, or else you're booked in the 2 main clubs. But they're all booked through, the big Live Nation people. So
yeah, that's actually where my shows. We just moved in March to the House of Blues, Houston and Dallas. So I was like, what's he about to say about Live Nation? I don't know if I have to cut anything out. But they're basically who I'm working for now.
Right. Well, that's good. I mean, if you can get working with them, that's awesome.
And a lot of fans who were very like not so supportive of the move, but my stance was like, yeah, but they've also got a nationwide network. So if we can get the shows into there, the possibility of being able to go to multiple cities because they go very plug and play once you're in, the growth potential is what I went for.
Yeah, well, that's a great move. And I mean, talk about the business of comedy. That's a great move to plug into that. And it was like the improvs too. If you worked one improv and they liked you, then you could work all of the improvs. And that was a great move to do. If you're not in the network, though, then of course you're going to feel like you're left out in the cold, and so you have to find some alternate places to play.
Do you do a lot of club work and tours still, or?
I go out a couple times a month. Certainly not like I used to, where I was living in clubs, 6-7 nights a week. But I always seemed to have a day job anyway during my career because I was always married with a kid, so. Even when I was divorced, I still didn't go way out on the road. I go up and down maybe the West Coast.
So when you were opening for Robin Williams, that was here?
Yeah, I mean, I worked down in L.A. a little bit.
Okay.
I worked, but it wasn't like I was his regular opener, but I opened a couple shows with him. Kurtis, I think, builds me up too much. But I know Robin Williams, I got to hang out a lot with Robin Williams, and I know Robin Williams was considered a friend, which was awesome. I mean, because before I started comedy, I remember seeing him on the early Mork and Mindy show when I was in college, and everything would just stop and everyone would just go watch Mork and Mindy because this guy, Robin Williams, was on and he was phenomenal. But when I started comedy and then I got to meet him and, the first week in comedy, I went to some party, he started making fun of me, and I was like, this is it. I'm in the right place.
We're friends now.
Yeah, this is great.
So this was pre or post sobriety when you were?
This is pre-sobriety.
Okay.
And then got to actually become decent friends with him in sobriety, which was great. And that was through Michael Pritchard and some other sober comedians because, you're sober, you start to gravitate towards other comedians, so that was a fun thing.
I know you're going to have to get going. So I ask everybody, we have the same closing question. If you need time to think about it, it's fine. I will cut things out.
I'm an Aquarius. I like long walks on the beach.
You're an Aquarius also?
And yeah.
I am not. Curtis is. And I was like, you're the second Aquarius I think I've ever met in my life. So now you're third instantly.
That's why I get along with Curtis.
That's so funny.
And what's your sign, by the way?
I'm an Aries.
Okay.
So final question is, if you could snap your fingers and people around the world instantly believed two things, just that is their reality now, what would it be and why? The only caveats is one of them has to be selfless and for the good of humanity. The other one, completely selfish and self-serving.
These are hard questions.
Yes, I know. That's the point.
How can you throw this? Of course, the first one, even when you said that, it was like people just be kinder and more understanding. That's what I'd like to see more of, including myself, of course, because I'm usually fairly kind to people, but once I get behind the wheel of a car, then I'm not
it's
kind
easy to
and generous.
forget. I actually,
you son of a bitch.
I heard something. I don't know if this is true. That's road rage and those kinds of things that you're talking about. Because in the car we're going, faster than we can walk or run, so that there's a subconscious thing that's saying we're in danger. So we're in fight or flight mode the entire time we're in a car.
That's very
so that's why we're so high strung and why everything sets us off.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, I thought that made a lot of sense.
That makes a lot of sense. I've gotten a lot better, by the way. But if, as they say in sobriety, if your spiritual condition is good, then nothing's going to bother you. You're going to be able to weather that. So yes, I guess the two-part question is, yes, I'd like people to be kinder and more generous, which we see the opposite effect in the world a lot now from our own leaders and this massive run to the top to try to get as much as you can of whatever it is, resources, money, property. But that's, of course, cyclical. That happens. And then the other thing is to be completely selfish.
Just something everybody instantly believes this thing, and it's a wonderful selfish thing for you.
Oh my God, there's so many downsides to that, though. I mean, of course, the dream of making it on some successful level is always one of those things that drives you. But I feel that my life is a success right now, even though I don't have to. I mean, I have enough of a reputation without any fame or anything else, so I'm not bothered. I can be anonymous, but I can go up and perform and be outrageous, and then I can disappear. So, I mean, I think I have that.
So fame might lower your life.
No, I've changed my whole idea about fame. I don't need to be famous.
Your quality of life will go down substantially.
Forget fame. That's no good. And even enormous amounts of money, you still need to hire all these people to take care of it, and they're always going to steal as much as they can.
Every time.
It doesn't matter.
Who was it? Somebody's in the middle of a lawsuit right now that their person bought a house and all this other stuff right under their nose. And I said, to have so much money to not notice that someone bought a house with yours is crazy.
I mean, I know enough wealthy people that they have to deal with that doesn't seem like it's there's more negatives than there's positives about that. Even though we're spoon-fed this dream of you've got to be rich and famous. It's like, oh my God, it's such a pain in the ass. And seeing people, Robin Williams is a perfect example of someone who got everything that every stand-up wants. I mean, everybody wanted to get to be able to be fantastic on stage, to get a TV show, then to do movies, and then to live at home and do movies around your house. I mean, he did so many movies in the Bay Area because of
they
that.
will come to you.
Yeah, they'll come to you. But in the end, he still he couldn't take it with him, you know. And he was a phenomenally generous person too. I mean, there's a case to be made that he's probably one of the finest Americans this country's produced, because he did all these USO shows. I mean,
yes, he did. Yes,
I mean, and it wasn't like just the base. He would go out to like Firebase Taliban and do he'd chopper in and do a show for 20 people with. His personal assistant Rebecca Irwin was saying it was her, Kathy Madigan, and the Joint Chief of Staff Mullins' wife. Because he was in charge, the Joint Chief of Staff Mullins was in charge of the whole USO in Afghanistan and Iraq. And it would be 3 girls choppering in with Robin, and they'd be at some place where they're like, give you a plastic bag to go to the bathroom in, and then go behind these, this pile of rocks that we put in the fire base over here.
Yeah, but they do it to give them a little bit of home, which I think is amazing.
Yeah. But I mean, Robin would just go to all these places. And so, I mean, he's definitely the guy who made it all. But you look at it and you go, even with all that success, he still had to deal with all sorts of stuff. But he left his mark. He was such a generous person. He was very generous with his wealth and his time. And so, I mean, that to me is like a perfect example of somebody who made it and used it, but he still struggled with drugs and alcohol sometimes. And then the Parkinson's took over, and, he had an aggressive form of Parkinson's, and he saw his whole life just, sand going out of the hourglass, and it was like, that was rough. So, so I don't, I think the selfish thing that would be is just being able to pursue the things that interest me, but I don't need everybody to learn to
to do that. Yeah, you can do that now.
I can do that right now. So
I mean, it sounds like you're a perfect example of, like, I guess, kind of like living the program, because you're living in gratitude. That the fact that you don't even have an answer for that one. Most people have an answer right away, but yeah, that you're living in a space of gratitude, and I think that's beautiful.
It's unbelievable, because my selfish nature doesn't want to be grateful, but when I start to become grateful, I realize, oh my God, this is the best deal ever. It's so funny. It's like
it's almost very selfish, because you then live a better life.
You're like, oh shit, I get all the cash and prizes if I'm grateful. If I go help this other newcomer, if I go volunteer my time and do some shit over here for some people and help these poor bastards or whatever, it's like, oh my God, I'm, and it's phenomenal how that works. And because it's real easy to see once you're sober when someone's ego is out of control.
Oh, yeah. I sometimes feel guilty for seeing that, where I'm like, am I just projecting on them? And I don't want to... Yeah, I feel guilty for feeling like I see those things in people, because I don't want to be judgy or anything. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, he needs it. He's got a lot of ego and issues. And I don't want to think that about people, but I see it.
When you see it, of course, you're like, oh my God, it's what a horrible... You can just pray for him, because...
I think because it feels so familiar. It's seeing something that you know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The old you spot it, you got it type of thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But yeah, and of course, being performers, you have to have an ego to push yourself up there, to even just to create a persona and do that. But having the program as a counterbalance to that is wonderful, because you're like, okay, well, I am a performer right now, but a little later, I'm a worker among workers. I'm just another sober alcoholic who needs this program. I'm just this person. I'm this, you break it down all the way down. I'm another carbon-based life form that needs oxygen to live. I'm not special, whatever. But because of this program, I get to do all these little interesting things, and I see things. And so it's like, it is a good...
Yeah, there's a lot of freedom, I think, in feeling like you're not special. Because I'm not worried about what is everybody thinking and that kind of stuff, and I just feel free.
That's a wonderful thought, KiKi. It is. There's a tremendous freedom in that, isn't it?
So y'all hear that? Be good people, even if it's for completely selfish reasons.
Yeah.
That's all we ask.
Yeah, be unselfish out there, but you'll be the one who gets the payoff.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. Do I need to plug any products or something?
You are welcome to.
I don't know.
I was like, if you have any projects or anything you want to plug.
No.
Yeah. Socials?
No,
websites?
I don't have, no. I did a movie in sobriety called Hey Monster, Hands Off My City, which we're going to be showing again at the Hole in the Head Festival in San Francisco in December. But and then eventually it'll probably be available online again. It was for a while, but it's not online. But anyway, it was filled with comedians and
awesome.
A bunch of sober people too. Like I'd be in a meeting going, that person over there would be perfect for the role of so-and-so. So
casting in meetings?
Totally, yeah. You know how you go to a casting call and you're at 30 seconds to impress somebody?
Yeah.
I was sitting at a meeting going, oh yeah, Rita over there would make a great cop.
Oh my God.
So Rita ended up in the movie. It was just so funny.
So funny.
Or like, hey, you want to...
Use your pain.
Yes, it was like, hey, we need a couple crazy people. Oh, and there was another thing. We needed a crowd of people, but it was during the day, and nobody's available during the day. But then there was all these people who were at the halfway house. At the halfway house, it was like, hey, everybody will give you $20. It's cigarette money. They're like, we're there.
Oh my God.
So this is a great scene where the guys with 6 or 8 people are all supposed to be there cheering for him, and they're all
That's hilarious. Okay, so I'm gonna see if I can come up in December for the screening for that alone.
It was, but yeah, I mean, it was the total program. Just using the program.
That's so good.
But of course, it was fun, and just so many other people helped me out on so many ways. But the sobriety thing was very funny to sit in a meeting and see somebody, and then some of it didn't work either. Like there was this one girl I met who was a roller derby. She was struggling. She was struggling to get sober, but she was a roller derby one. I was like, oh my God. Wouldn't that be awesome to have some roller derby people just zip through the scene, But it never happened. But anyway, the idea was sparked.
It fills you with it. You might as well use these talents.
Yeah.
I actually, one of my first episodes, I think it was the second or third, I spoke with a roller derby girl. Same thing, very in Austin, very party culture.
Oh, totally. Because you deal with pain. I mean, it's physical. I mean, it's football.
Yeah,
basically.
and then afterwards, everybody's just drinking together and stuff. And so they actually would make little sober shots for her because they still wanted her to feel included.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. That's rugby on wheels, kind of.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Smashing in.
Well, thank you so much. I will make sure to include everything in the show notes about the movie and everything. I really appreciate you sitting down with me.
KiKi, thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. Bye.
Best of luck.
And when tomorrow comes around, I may be 6 feet underground, but I'll still have one more for now.
That was Michael Meehan. I love that we ended our conversation on gratitude. Finding gratitude has deeply changed who I am for the better. Now I make a conscious effort to not focus on what I don't have or what I quote unquote should have, but instead being grateful for my accomplishments, my family, my friends, and ultimately my life. I haven't counted the number of times I could have died, but I assure you my dumbass did a lot of things while drinking that, had I died, people probably would have just laughed it off as Darwinism. So yeah, I've got a lot to be grateful for. One of the things I'm grateful for right now is Michael telling me that Bobcat Goldthwait is sober. I have been a fan of his stand-up for years, but I never really researched him to know that he didn't drink. This is bananas to me because, okay, as y'all know from the title of the show, I was an alcoholic stripping clown. I was surrounded by a bunch of clowns, showgirls, sideshow freaks, everything. A bunch of crazy shit happened. I flipped a truck, dealt with cops, got sober, find happiness. Right? So I knew that Bobcat had played an alcoholic clown in his 1991 movie Shakes the Clown, but I'd never seen it. I just assumed it was like a, we're a bunch of dirty clowns, funny, raunchy movie. After Michael said that Bobcat was sober, I wanted to learn more about him. So I watched Shakes and it's my story. He's this fucked up clown in this fucked up clown world who seems to be a good person but can't get his shit together. A bunch of stuff happens, cops get involved, and the ending is him at an AA meeting getting his shit together. It's an absurd, surreal, ridiculous movie, and I cried. I felt like a freak for so much of my life. Seeing something that mirrored my admittedly bizarre story made me feel like I wasn't alone. And here's where it gets even crazier. While I was on probation, I wasn't allowed to enter any establishment that served alcohol, which meant I wasn't allowed to perform. I kept doing it because I was an alcoholic, hard-headed mess who wasn't going to let the man tell me what to do. But my probation officer saw a photo of me performing, so it kind of got a little sticky. Rather than stop, like a reasonable person, I started wearing a mask every time I was on stage. During that time, Bobcat and I shared a backstage at this music festival in Houston. So I asked to take a selfie with him because, yay, Bobcat. It's still on my Instagram right now. He's a normal looking man and I'm a drunk piñata wearing a Mardi Gras mask, risking jail time for a gig that paid $20 in drink tickets. So not only did Bobcat tell my story, he was in my story. That is crazy. So if you want to see that photo, it's on my Instagram and Twitter at KiKi Maroon. The Instagram for this podcast specifically is at ClownPod. That's clown, P-O-D, no spaces. And of course, you can always join me on my Patreon. Patreon's a cool place where you can show your support for the show, sending anywhere between $1 a month or $1,000 a month over to help cover the cost. It's just a really cool platform that allows me to continue running this show along with my circus, comedy, YouTube, everything else. So there's more info on that in the show notes, whether you want to call it a donation or a tip, it's all greatly appreciated. And as always, I want to thank The Last Domino for use of his song Last Call. That is our theme song. You can find that in the show notes as well. And hey, thank you so much for listening. Have a great week.
Now it's the last call for heaven's train. If only you weren't too